Welcome to Speak Your Mind by Climobilize. My guests for this session are Bill Baue and Ralph Thurm, who are co-founders of R3.0, which stands for Redesign for Resilience and Regeneration. Bill and Ralph are positive mavericks that identify shortcomings of the existing economic system. Gentlemen, thank you so much for being here. It's great to have you.
Thank you, Brad.
Thank you very much.
In this session, Bill and Ralph will be discussing how to drive policy and systems change at scale while protecting individual rights from government overreach and authoritarianism. I think this is an important topic that has not been explored, and I'm looking forward to hearing these gentlemen discuss it. Gentlemen, the floor is yours.
Well, thanks so much, Brad. And I'm going to take a first stab at this and hopefully bridge over to Ralph. It's a fascinating question. And I think actually, if we start just by looking at the structure of the question itself, so it's saying sort of policy and systems change in one fell swoop. But I would say that in our work, we're actually very skeptical whether policy can drive the level of change that's necessary. Largely what we see on the policy realm is policies that are emerging within an existing system, particularly an existing political system that, we have a belief that this system is advancing democracy. And I think when you look closer at the development of democracy, what we see is foundations in anti-democratic structures. So in particular, what I'd say is that our political systems that are predominant in the world right now have emerged from the colonizing past and continuing present of colonization that we've inherited. So democracy as an idea is distinct from democracy as it's been practiced and established. In particular, I think that the melding of democracy with capitalism has been particularly problematic because capitalism is an anti-democratic process, if you will, particularly the form of capitalism that's predicated on the colonizing effects that have been with us for centuries at this point. So I think, in brief, I think that there are limits to the degree that policy can actually bring about the transformations that are necessary. For that reason, I think that focusing on the systems change side of things is much more important. So in other words, we need systems change, systems transformation before we can achieve the kinds of policy gains, at least at the national level, that we need. And so I think on that front, what we focus on at R3.0 is creating the kinds of mindset and worldview transformations that are necessary in our mind in order to even create the kinds of systems, achieve the kinds of systems that could be actually healthy and thriving. So long as we're existing in the systems that are predominant right now, we're not going to see the kinds of transformations that are necessary. So, and I can talk in a little bit about sort of the mechanisms that we would look at to create this kind of different form of systems change. But I guess the question is, what's going to trigger that kind of systems change? And I think with that, I'll hand it over to Ralph for his thoughts on sort of what that trigger might be.
Thank you very much, Bill. Yes, indeed. And just the pure existence of R3.0 already gives you the idea that this is a question that we are tackling for about a decade now. The idea of redesign for resilience and regeneration was triggered by the outcome document of the Rio +20 conference, which was called The Future We Want. And we said, no, this is not going to happen. That's going to take forever. It's the future that we design. And with that comes the question, what is the ideal economic system that would actually lead to a just, fair, and proportionate share of resources and being in balance with this planet? And what we were seeing right from the start was that the existing economic system doesn't give us that. With all its different shortcomings, which we spend a lot of time on really finding out, okay, so what is it in all depth that's going wrong? What are the shortcomings, and how can we get to recommendations in different areas that need to simultaneously leapfrog to get us to that ideal of what we call a regenerative, distributive, restorative economy? And that has been our work for the last 10 years. And it has more and more, we have more and more come to the conclusion, as long as we deal with sort of like second order issues, the first order problem will not be solved. And, you know, we've spent a lot of time on reporting on accounting and business model design and data structures and educational aspects. Sustainable finance, does it really exist? What sort of funding is needed for that economic system to actually trigger from an exploitative to a restorative and distributive economy? And we more and more see that the current players, but also the current tools, are just not working. You know, you could just look at the COPs of the last couple of years. You know, we've been to several oil-producing states, and we'll go to Azerbaijan next year, which household is 90% dependent on oil and gas. Well, Dubai was maybe 60%, and what was it? Egypt maybe 40 or 50%. So you know, we're just simply seeing that the existing instruments just don't work. Just look at the number of states that declared a climate emergency. Has anything happened? Did any government react? Did we see any real attempt to change the economic system in ways that it is, you know, towards that ideal? Look at all the countries where Fridays for Future or other groups sued their own government. And they were sued. Has happened anything since then? So what's that worth? You know, they're only going to get sued again for not doing what they were sued for. So from that perspective, what we're seeing, and the whole cocooning in the world with the right-wing movements in all the countries that are just trying to create more of me, instead of us, are just all signs of a failing system. And we at R3.0, we've come to the conclusion that actually the existing system shows all the signs of collapse. And I'm so far to say we are already at free fall. We're across the abyss. And the only thing that we now see is that who gets the biggest parachutes? Those are the things that we deal with. So we have, maybe as one of the first sort of movements, if we want to call us a movement as well, declared that, you know, we think we're in collapse. And that asks the question, okay, so what can we then do if we're in collapse in order to prepare ourselves to either a rather smoother collapse, or shall we focus our energy on what we call post-collapse readiness? And that is a lot of sort of the steps that we don't see people go through. You know, first of all, to you know, just become clear that collapse avoidance is maybe not the right energy to spend, or activities on collapse avoidance. We're beyond that point. So that whole idea of going from collapse awareness to collapse acknowledgement, and then going to post-collapse readiness, I think has really shifted also for R3.0, where we're still of the belief this economic system won't make it. We will need a different economic system. Now, how do we get there? And that is where we are right now, and where we are trying to position ourselves in that way, and try to attract people to that idea of how are we going to deal with collapse, as it is happening, and how are we going to get ready for whatever comes after that. However harsh, however brutal, however unfair it is being in collapse, but there is a world after collapse as well.
Yeah,
Don't you think we're going to see, if I just want to reiterate on that point, don't you think we're going to see the worst of authoritarian leaders in a collapse? If you go back to disaster capitalism as a formula for authoritarians and overreach, it seems like this is the perfect recipe for the worst of fascist authoritarian leaders.
well, I think if you look at authoritarianism as a symptom, then you can understand that it's a totally predictable pattern that authoritarianism would heighten as resources and as a way of being that has colonized resources reaches a kind of crisis, if you will. So, in other words, the colonistic approach that has predominated in the previous centuries has resulted in an extraction of resources and an overuse of resources that's simply not sustainable. I mean, the data is unequivocal and clear on that. And so essentially we have two options at this point, to oversimplify. We can double down on the kind of power over approaches that are trying to essentially be a grab. And, you know, the grabbing approach goes back to the beginnings of colonialism and the land grabbing. I mean, I think that's an approach that is playing itself out to its logical conclusion at this point. I think that we can look at another way and say, well, what are other approaches besides authoritarianism and essentially an unequal solution? That's what authoritarianism is. Ultimately a supremacist approach, that there are those who are better and that those who are worse, and that authoritarianism is to seek to support those who are quote unquote better. I think that the other way of looking at it is that no, humans are inherently equal, that there's nothing genetic that separates us from one another as species, you know, or as races even. I think the work of Ibrahim, Ibrahim, what's that?
I was thinking, yeah, I was also thinking about the name. Ibrahim.
Yeah, sorry about that. The Stamp from the Beginning author, Kendi, I believe his name is. Sorry to space out on that. Was essentially saying that you know, humans are all inherently equal. And I think that if we look to the resilience that has weathered the storms of collapse, we would look back to indigenous traditions that have been sustainable for millennia. In particular, we at R3.0 had hosted Lila June Johnson, who did her doctoral research on indigenous cultures and their ways of managing resources, in particular food resources, that lasted for millennia and lasted through colonization attempts. And so I think that what this says to us is that ways of engaging that are egalitarian and that are in harmony not only with other human beings, but in harmony with our ecosystems, with our earth, and that show respect and gratitude, are much more successful strategies in the long term. And that's a radical systems change right now. Right now, the kinds of policies that we have, going back to that, are still grounded in authoritarian approaches. I mean, let's not kid ourselves that the United States, for example, is not truly a democracy. It actually already has significant elements of authoritarianism baked into it. So I think that we need to transcend the systems that we've shackled ourselves within, and to achieve a kind of tipping point of systems change, and that propagates itself by shifting beliefs. That we need to shift into beliefs that support social norms that are pro-social, that are essentially supporting the collective as compared to prioritizing the individual. So I'll end with this notion around individual rights. I always see individual rights through the lens of collective responsibility. So my rights as an individual are only relevant in the context of my responsibilities to the collective. So I can't do something as an individual that deprives the rights of other individuals or deprives the resources of the collective. So that's, I think that's an important distinction in terms of how this question is framed.
I just want to tell you guys, this time goes fast when there's great conversation. So we're getting close to the end. And I just want to thank you so far, because this has been fascinating. I mean, how do you trigger social change to affect the rest of the changes we need? And we're going to be exploring this in the sessions to come. Is there a thought or a take-home message that you would like to leave the audience with?
Yeah, I can start with one, just simply because we thought a lot about the alternatives to the existing system. And one of the things that we are going to prioritize in the future is the aspect of bioregionalism, and really push strongly towards what does it mean to live in a bioregion? What does a bioregion really mean? What can it supply? What can it not supply? How would bioregions interact with each other? And with that, I'm not speaking about nation states and about powers that be, but really, from a regenerative and distributive economy perspective, what sort of exchanges will happen? What sort of currency is necessary for that? What sort of discussing in and between bioregions is necessary? And how would bioregions really weave in a way that you can see the coming up of a regenerative and distributive governance that overcomes the brutal killing aspects of current globalization, because that's part of the killer gene of capitalism and what we made out of that. So that is really a very, very important prioritization when you think about post-collapse readiness and how to structure and design life after collapse.
Yeah, I guess I would just build on that by pointing to a kind of dynamic balance between radical diversity, or sort of recognizing the inherent existence, but also value of a pluriverse, to use that term from Arturo Escobar, a pluriverse of diverse perspectives, diverse strategies, diverse cultures, etc., and balancing that with the notion of solidarity. I think that in our field, for example, in the field of sustainability, there's a fair amount of infighting that, we've been part of that as well, sort of around sort of what is the best or necessary approach. And so I don't think that what we want is a kind of monoculture of one approach, but what we do want is solidarity amongst actors at a core level of sort of respect for all life forms, and respect for that diversity of different approaches that are all heading towards a system that actually can persist and can thrive. So this is sort of a call for us to express humility of, we may not have the right answer, And it's really key to be able to collaborate or to move in parallel with one another in the kind of weaving that Ralph mentioned. We don't have to all be doing exactly the same thing, but we should be acting in solidarity, particularly with those who are the most vulnerable and who've been most adversely impacted by our existing systems.
Brilliant. You guys are great. I appreciate your time so much. These are the types of conversations we need to have, and the nonsense that goes on at places like COP is not helping. And so much time and energy goes towards something that doesn't get to solutions, and we need actions. Um, I feel inspired by your ideas, and I hope that we can all work together to solve these challenges as we start a new year. So thanks again so much for your time. Be well.
Thank you, Brad.
Thanks, Brad.